Well, hello everyone. I'm going to talk about what's on my server, what's on that server. It will be a talk about enumeration, which is a huge step, very important step in pen testing. So let's start with who am I? So I'm a student at IS I'm passionate about cybersecurity, and you can reach me on my socials, so Discord, Twitter, or on my website. So first, we are going to talk about what is pen testing and what is enumeration. What is the purpose of a pen test? What are the steps in an engagement? Then we will talk about why enumeration is important and why you should know how to do it properly. How it will help you during an offensive engagement. And then I will talk to you about how can we enumerate correctly, what tools, what are the methodology we use, and then I will conclude. So first, what is a pen test and what is enumeration? Let's start. So pen testing, it means penetration test. It's a kind of testing where you try to get into an information system. You try to hack your way in a computer or in servers. It's an offensive engagement. It means you are really attacking a service. You are attacking an infrastructure. You are attacking servers or enterprises. You really have to know what you are doing, because you have to know it's illegal in most cases. If you do it in pen tests, it must be an enterprise that tells you to do it, or on your training on the platforms like Hackbox, or RootMe, or even self-hosted machines. Then, so enumeration, to enumerate something is to gather as much information as possible. So there are usernames, passwords, email addresses, domain names, virtual hosts, services, so services running on the server, so the web application, the database, or pretty much everything. And infrastructure. It is good to know, like, if the company is using Kubernetes to host their infrastructure, or if it's running on the Amazon Web Services, or even on Dockers, etc. So here are the steps of a pen test. So the first step is reconnaissance. You have to know perfectly your target. You really have to know how much people in the enterprise, how much people working in each services, what do they sell? For example, what is their service? For example, if you are pen testing, if your company asks you to pen test them, you have to know, for example, if they sell flowers, for example. If they have two websites, you have to know they have two websites, for example. You have to know everything. So once you know you also have, you need to have the proof, you have the rights to attack them. This is very important. So once you have all the information you need, you can start attacking services. So I think you have to start with simple enumeration, and we can finish with a shell on machine or shell on multiple machines. Shell, for your information, is when you can execute code on a server. Once you can execute code on a server, it's called remote code execution. You want to be administrator of the machine. On Linux machines, the user administrator is the root user. Here again, enumeration is really mandatory. You have to do it. Without enumeration, you won't be able to do anything. And once you are an administrator, you can then try to pivot in the network. Pivoting is like finding other targets in the network. For example, if you're pen testing an internal service, a company, you might have an Active Directory, and you have to know which are the machine part of the Active Directory, who is the administrator of that Active Directory, etc. Also, you have to know if it's in a virtual network or something. You have to find all the machines in the virtual network. So now I'm going to talk to you about why is enumeration important, mostly in pen test. So let's go. So enumeration is at every step of a test. So first, you will try to find services. So you have to enumerate servers, IPs, and pretty much everything to find services you can attack. You might have vulnerabilities. To find targets, if you're on the server, you have to enumerate all the servers to find targets. To find users, for example, if you want to, for example, if you have a WordPress application running, you have to know you can enumerate users by brute forcing the login page, for example. This is called enumeration. To find vulnerabilities, you have to enumerate all of the websites, for example, to find vulnerabilities, because they can be everywhere. You have to enumerate to find pivoting points, so to reach other targets, and also to find escalation vectors. For example, you are a user on a website, and to find a vulnerability to get the rights of the owner of the website, you have to find escalation vectors, and for this, enumeration is mandatory. So here are the steps of a pen test, or an attack in general. We'll keep the pen test as we go. So the first step will be enumerating and find vulnerable services. Then you will be able to attack the service, okay? And once you attack the service, you reach your goal, you will have to enumerate again, and once you enumerate enough, you will be able to attack again, then enumerate, and it's kind of a loop. So it's very, very important to master this out. So now I'm going to teach you how to enumerate properly. This part will be a bit more technical, and this way you will maybe able to get to hack your way in. So starting with network enumeration, we have a very famous tool. Most of you must know it. So it's Nmap, which means network map. It's a network discovering tool, which means with this tool you can discover open ports on a server, for example. So you give it an IP address, some options, and it will scan for you the network. It has a lot of features, such as script scan. So script scan will fingerprint the service. For example, you can see here there's a HTTP server running. This is due to the script scan. Also, there are vulnerability scans, which are pretty much very basic. Unless it's Windows services. On Windows, there are vulnerability scans, which are really interesting. We won't get into it right now. There are also alternatives, such as RustScan, which is a network and map written in Rust, which is quicker than Nmap, a bit less precise. And MassScan, for example, which is very, very fast. This tool can scan the whole internet in 6 minutes. So here's the output of a Nmap. So for example, if we tell you on this machine, it's a hacked machine, so totally legal. Here you can see there's a port 22 open, running SSH on open SSH set.9. So it also tells us it's running on Debian, so it's a Linux distribution. We have 2222 also running SSH, but a different version, and the fingerprint tells us it's a different Linux operating system. Already at this point, it gives us even more information that is written, because if we have two SSH ports running and different version of operating system, we can already think about how is this possible. And the main reason, I think, here is that this SSH service is running inside a container, for example. So on one machine, there are two machines. So here, for example, I'm pretty sure it's a Docker container running SSH, and probably also the HTTP service. So So as I told you earlier, there's an HTTP service, and Nmap tells us there are also, for example, disallowed entries in the robots.txt file. I think most of you know what it is. If you don't know, it's a file placed on a web server that tells robots not to check this page. For example, Google robots that is used for indexing pages. It also gives us a bunch of more extra information that is not always useful, such as versions. So now I will talk here about web enumeration, for example, if you are pentesting a web application. So if you have access, this is an example of how I will enumerate a service if I have to, and what's the methodology. So first, the first thing you will do is find pages. You have to find every pages on the server, which might not be found easily. For example, doc/admin.php. It's really rare that there will be a link to this endpoint. So personally, I use GoBuster, but there are also other tools such as WFuzz or Fuff, or anyway. So it will propose the server with HTTP requests with the most common page name. You give it a word list, like a list of common pages, and it will try everything and check the output of the server. And the error code, for example, if you don't have the right to access this page, if the page doesn't exist, if the page exists, it will give you, for example, the size of the response. So I would then check robots.txt and sitemap.xml, which are often really interesting, mostly in CTFs, in capture the flags. Most of the time when you don't find what you have to do, it's in this file. Also, it is important to check, for example, .git or .svn, which can link the source code. And having the source code of an application is always an advantage. It's called white box pen testing. It's when a company asks you to pen test them, and they give you their code, so you can do it with the code. So it's white box. You can see everything. I think it's always an advantage because you can see the code and underlying vulnerabilities. Also, you have to look for documentations. For example, if a company has an API, it is important to check the documentation, to know how it's working, and then you will be able to play with it. Also, you might want to look for external requests, which means opening your developer tools on Firefox or your web browser, and check what the website is requesting to check even more pages. You could find vulnerabilities in this. Also, this is really important for boxes like Hack the Box. It is important to check for virtual hosts. If you have a domain name, so a domain name is like domain.com, or before domain.com is virtual host. So for example, here the virtual host is virtual host. But you can have like shop.domain.com or www.domain.com, etc. To enumerate all images, it's a bit different. So first you fingerprint every versions. So it's easy to get a list. I often do this for the bounties. I get every versions of every software, and if there is a vulnerability on the software, I try and I will check on the website if it's vulnerable. Then you will then check for OS top 10, OS every year, OS. So the Open Web Application Security Project give a list of the top 10 vulnerabilities on a web application. So it's always important to check for these vulnerabilities first, because they are the most common. It is important to enumerate every input. If you see, like for example, in the URL, if you see, for example, a question mark and like Q equals and something, you might want to try putting quotes, double quotes, backslash, slashes, or brackets, called brackets, etc. This is also called enumeration, but we also call it fuzzing. You give the application a lot of inputs, and you check for the outputs, and check if something is weird. It's also important to enumerate because, for example, if the staff is present on the main page, for example, there's the CEO, the CTO, etc. You might want to take their usernames, their names, their surnames, and make a combo list. Like if the CEO of the company is John Doe, you might want to make a list of usernames like John underscore Doe, G Doe, John Doe, etc. So this is about enumerating usernames. You might want to make passwords also, but it's a bit harder. So there are tools to do this, just as SEO, etc. So our ultimate goal is to achieve remote code execution, but this cannot be done without enumeration. So once you're on the server and you've got remote code execution, for example, if you want to be root or administrator, there is one tool that is really famous. It's called InPeas. This tool, it checks everything on the server, files, backup files, current tabs, etc. And it will tell you, hey, for example, this might be vulnerable. It might be a good thing to run on your computer and see. Okay, I can. If an attacker had access to my computer, he could become administrator by running this tool and checking the output. And like for example, if you have a cron tab that isn't safe, the tool will tell you. There are also other tools, but this is the main one. This one is only for Linux services and Linux servers, but there is also a version for Mac and for Windows, which is WinPeas, another name for Mac. But this tool kind of enumerates for you, but it is really important to read the output because you are the one doing the strategy job behind this. It just gives you hints on what could be vulnerable. So it's really, I think, the best tool to enumerate a server. So thank you for listening. I hope you learned things. Does anybody have questions? No questions?
Eva, des questions.
Bah. C'est un peu donner un micro.
Can you come back at the beginning?
Tell me when to stop. Before, after?
The next one. Again. No, the next.
Next.
Okay, sorry.
Yes. I did not understand what are pivoting balls.
Pivoting? For example, if you're running, if you're testing an application running in the cloud, so you have to know if it's running in the cloud. Often there is not only one server, but often like tens. And so you might have like one web application running, but maybe it's linked to another server, which is running a database. Maybe another server which is running an analytics server. Maybe another server which is running monitoring. And for example, if you're on a server, you're an administrator on one server, you could, for example, install Nmap and Nmap all other services in one virtual network. For example, there will be, if you type IP space A on your terminal, it will give you network interfaces, right? I may have lost some point from people here. So you have several IPs, and one of them will belong to one virtual network. So it's like a virtual network, so machines linked inside a network that is the property of the cloud. And you will want to find all the other machines in the cloud. So you can get other targets, and pivoting is like attacking another target from one that you already compromised. Thank you. Yes, Thomas.
Okay, so let's say during the reconnaissance phase, using Gaussian techniques, you find critical data about someone or something that shouldn't be there. Could you report it to the higher ups and get a reward for it, or?
If you find it, if you're doing bug bounties, so hunting for bugs, yes, you will get a reward. But if you're pen testing, most of the time, you will be hired for a mission. So it will be like, for example, 1 week, 2 weeks, maybe 2 months. It depends. So you won't get a reward for it, especially, but you will be paid anyway. But you have to report it. No more questions? Thank you for listening again, and see you.